Few films depict the grotesque excesses of modern consumption as powerfully as Marco Ferreri's Le Grand Bouffe. This 1973 satire portrays four bourgeois men, played by Marcello Mastroianni, Ugo Tognazzi, Michel Piccoli, and Philippe Noiret, who seclude themselves in a countryside villa with the aim of eating themselves to death. Through its repulsive, exaggerated imagery and surreal humor, Le Grand Bouffe presents a savage critique of capitalist overconsumption, bourgeois decadence, and the self-destructive nature of class privilege. At its core, the film is a metaphor for late-stage capitalism, a system that drives endless consumption, even at the cost of human life, dignity, and societal collapse. The film's central premise, a suicidal food binge among the upper middle class, is not merely absurdist humor, but a searing commentary on capitalism's contradictions. In Ferreri's world, consumption becomes self destruction. The four protagonists, who have every material comfort and professional success, willingly indulge in a ritual of gluttony that culminates in their deaths. The actions parody a capitalist ethos in which more is always better, regardless of the consequences. Just as capitalistic societies valorize accumulation and consumption without limits, these men eat, not to live, but to die. Ferreri never makes the characters' suicidal intentions explicit. They never say, "We're here to kill ourselves for food," but their behavior and the film's structure makes the outcome inevitable. This mirrors how capitalist institutions never admit that their drive for infinite growth is unsustainable. Economic systems and political leaders do not openly acknowledge that environmental collapse, wealth inequality, or mental health crises are symptoms of the same disease: unchecked consumption driven by profit. Le Grand Bouffe makes this subtext grotesquely literal. The men do not die from starvation or deprivation, they are consumed by their own indulgence. Each character embodies a different archetype of the bourgeois man. Marcello is a pilot, Ugo is a chef, Michel is a television producer, and Philippe is a judge. Their professions and lifestyles symbolize power, influence, and cultural capital. But despite the material wealth and social standing, they are hollow, bored, and alienated. Rather than seek meaning or connection, they retreat into an orgy of gourmet food and sexual gratification. Chef Ugo, played by Ugo Tonazzi, plays a particularly important role as both a character and a real life culinary figure. Tonazzi brings authenticity to the film's obsession with food. His culinary skills serve the group's deadly mission. He prepares elaborate dishes with meticulous care, even as his companions begin to physically break down. His piece de résistance, a pâté d'homme, becomes a literal death trap. Ugo's final moments are spent lying on his back, being force fed his own masterpiece, an image that crystallizes the horror of a system where production and consumption feed directly into death. Food in Le Grand Bouffe is not about nourishment or pleasure, it's a grotesque parody of both. The film's depictions of meat, desserts, and sauces become increasingly vile and excessive, reflecting how capitalism strips objects of their original purpose and inflates them into empty symbols of luxury and status. This aligns with theories like Jean Baudrillard, who argued that consumer society replaces utility with symbolic value. In Ferreri's film, food is a fetish, and consumption becomes self annihilation. Into this masculine nightmare enters Andrea, a schoolteacher portrayed by Andrea Ferrello. Unlike the prostitutes who briefly visit and then flee, Andrea stays until the end. Her presence complicates the film's gender dynamics and deepens its critique. She oscillates between caretaker and seductress, embodying the Madonna Hall complex that haunts patriarchal fantasies. She nurtures the men, comforts them in their final moments, and engages in sexual relationships with each of them. Yet, Andrea is not simply a passive participant. As the last survivor, she becomes both witness and enabler of the men's self destruction. Her complicity in their deaths suggests a broader indictment of those who benefit from systems of exploitation without challenging them. In this way, Andrea represents not only the contradictions of femininity under patriarchy, but also the passive bystanders of capitalist excess, the consumers who sustain the system, even as it kills them. The setting of the Grande Bouffe is crucial to its symbolism. The villa is overstuffed with Orientalist rugs, paintings, antiques, and decorative clutter, a visual representation of Europe's colonial legacy. These props signify centuries of wealth extracted from colonized nations, now gathering dust in bourgeois homes. The decor suggests that capitalist excess is not a new phenomenon, but the latest chapter in a long history of greed and entitlement. Ferreri draws a direct line between colonialism and late stage capitalism. The European elites, having consumed the world through conquest, now turn inward, consuming themselves. The men's deaths are not just personal tragedies, but symbolic of a civilization that has run out of worlds to conquer and resources to exploit. What remains is a grotesque feast of its own carcass, a process of cultural, economic, and environmental cannibalism. Perhaps the most shocking imagery in Le Grand Boeuf comes in its second half, when the men's bodies begin to fail. Toilets overflow, excrement is smeared and consumed, and two corpses are hung in the freezer like meat. These images are not merely disgusting for their own sake, they serve as metaphors for the breakdown of civilizational boundaries between pleasure and pain, nourishment and waste, life and death. Ferreri uses bodily functions to expose the absurdity of horror and capitalistic logic taken to its extreme. When production continues long after the body or system can no longer cope, the result is collapse. In a sense, Le Grand Boeuf shares thematic territory with Pasolini's Salo, although Ferreri's critique is more satirical than Pasolini's bleak realism. Both directors suggest that late capitalism is not merely exploitive, but sadomasochistic and self destructive. One of the film's most disturbing implications is that the men's suffering is entirely self imposed. They are not victims of famine, war, or oppression. They choose to gorge themselves, not out of necessity, but from ennui, narcissism, and a desperate desire to feel something. The deaths are not tragic, but farcical. Marcello freezes to death in a Bugatti. Philippe dies from a pudding induced diabetic shock. And Michelle's intestines explode in a grotesque parody of martyrdom. These absurd ends highlights the emptiness of their lives. For all their wealth and privilege, they have nothing to live for. This is Ferreri's harshest indictment. Capitalism promises satisfaction through consumption, but delivers only alienation. The more they eat, the less fulfilled they become. Their appetites grow even as their bodies and humanity deteriorate. Le Grand Bouffe is not merely a dark comedy or a critique of individual excess. It is a prophetic allegory for the self consuming logic of late capitalism. Through its grotesque depictions of food, waste, and death, it exposes how the bourgeois class, cushioned by privilege, can descend into suicidal indulgence without ever acknowledging the consequences of their actions. It shows how consumption, when decoupled from need or meaning, becomes a form of death. In a world increasingly defined by ecological collapse, economic inequality, and media fueled distraction, Ferreri's film feels more relevant than ever. We are all, in some way, guests at this fatal feast, participants in a system that offers endless gratification while quietly devouring us from within. Le Grand Bouffe does not offer a solution, but it does offer a warning. A civilization that consumes without restraint is one that will eventually consume itself.